and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The Pentagon says US strikes have degraded Iran's nuclear program by up to 2 years after destroying 3 key targets. Spokesman Sean Parnell told reporters Intel estimates put the damage probably closer to 2 years. The US State Department says it's unacceptable that Iran suspended cooperation with the IAEA. Washington insists Tehran return to full compliance immediately and without further delays. Hamas is expected to respond within 24 hours to a Qatari-brokered hostage deal after Israel gave its approval, sources tell Israeli media. With Qatar pressing hard and Trump warning things will only get worse, officials say there's real optimism Hamas will agree this time. North Korea plans to deploy up to 30,000 soldiers to Ukraine front lines to bolster Russian forces, CNN reports, citing Ukrainian intelligence. Satellite images show ships and cargo planes preparing as Washington considers how to respond to Pyongyang's move. Thailand's parliament elects a former defence chief as prime minister, earning the nickname Big Comrade. The move follows weeks of political horse trading after months of uncertainty. South Korea's president says he's doing the utmost to secure a major trade deal with the United States. The statement comes amid growing pressure to boost exports and strengthen economic ties. President Trump calls on FED Chair Jerome Powell to resign immediately in his latest attack on the central bank. Trump claims Powell's policies are damaging the economy and says it's time for new leadership. A US judge has denied Sean Diddy Coombs' request to be released on bail after his verdict. The ruling means the music mogul will remain in custody while the sentencing proceedings move forward. Now, our top story today. The Pentagon now believes US airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites have set back Tehran's atomic program by up to 2 years. The strikes, carried out more than 10 days ago, were initially assessed more cautiously, but a new intelligence review suggests the damage was more significant. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell says the estimate is probably closer to 2 years, though he did not provide any evidence. Defense officials say the operation appears to have met its strategic goals, marking a major moment in US efforts to slow Iran's nuclear ambitions. Let's take a listen to what the Pentagon spokesman had to say.
Sentiments about, the degradation of Iran's nuclear program and the fact that we have degraded their program by 1 to 2 years, at least intel assessments inside the department assess that, and I think their intelligence shares that conclusion.
Assessments by this department think it's been degraded or delayed by 1 to 2 years?
I think we're thinking probably closer to 2 years, like degraded their program by 2 years. Well, we're always assessing, our munitions and where we're sending them. And, part of what we wanted to do here at the department was, again, create a framework. We can't give weapons to everybody all around the world. We have to look out for America and defending our homeland and our troops around the world. So, that's something that we always do, both before and after operations, and it's the President's job, along with the Secretary of Defense, to determine how we use those weapons.
We're once again joined by Scott Faulkner, who's the head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm located in the American capital. Scott, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Given this new assessment, we have had a good few many since these strikes have happened over 10 days ago now. What are the potential unintended consequences for regional stability and also US credibility here? Does this really buy Washington the diplomatic leverage that it needs, or does it just delay the inevitable?
I think it delays the inevitable. All of my intelligence and defense sources are confirming the 2-year mark. primarily because the reverberations from these bunker buster bombs really did collapse the caverns and destroy everything inside. So they are. So the question is whether it's Mount X, which is supposedly about 3 times deeper than Fedor and some of these other facilities that were destroyed, whether the 15 trucks that we saw by Fedor really did take anything out. These are still to be assessed. But the key is that, as you said in your news broadcast, Iran's nuclear ambitions. As long as they have a nuclear ambition, there's going to be problems. That unless we bomb everything or unless we have regime change, Iran is going to continue to be a bad actor on the world stage, and certainly within the region. A hunk of paper, there's no way that anyone rationally is going to believe that Iran is going to adhere to any piece of paper they sign. The fact that they threw the IEA, the nuclear, the Atomic Energy Agency out. Who's going to monitor this stuff? I don't think Iran is going to cooperate in any way, shape, or manner.
Scott, thank you very much. You are staying with us for the further stories. We move on to a related development where the United States has slammed Iran's decision to suspend cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog, calling the move unacceptable. Tehran's announcement follows joint Israeli and US strikes on its nuclear facilities in June, strikes that set back Iran's program by up to 2 years, according to the Pentagon. Speaking in Washington, State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce said Iran had a chance to choose peace and prosperity, but instead turned away from diplomacy. Let's listen in to what the State Department spokeswoman had to say on the issue.
We'll use the word unacceptable, that Iran chose to suspend cooperation with the IAEA at a time when it has a window of opportunity to reverse course and choose a path of peace and prosperity. Iran must cooperate fully without further delay. Prior to the, as will the shutting down of your phone, that has to proceed without delay. Prior to the United States' successful military operation, Iran was amassing a growing stockpile of highly enriched uranium for which there was no credible peaceful purpose, and it was the only state producing highly enriched uranium up to 60% that does not have nuclear weapon.
The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran confirmed the suspension, raising concerns about future monitoring of its nuclear activities. The IAEA has yet to issue a full response, but diplomatic fallout is expected in Vienna and beyond. We're once again joined by Scott Faulkner to discuss this in further detail. Scott, is Iran's suspension of cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, a sign that the strikes have indeed backfired diplomatically? Obviously, Donald Trump phrased this as the end game. Was there any expectation that Iran would maintain contact to be inspected by this nuclear watchdog?
I don't think there was really any expectation that Iran was going to be operate in any good faith with any entity, especially the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency. Again, the whole point of the strike was that intelligence said that they had was really within almost days of having up to 12 warheads, at which point they were going to use them. So that's why you had to destroy what was there. Again, we're back to Iran is a bad player. They've always been a bad player since the beginning of their revolution. They remain a bad player, and they will continue to be a bad player, whether it is building their ballistic missile armory, whether it is their nuclear ambitions, whether it is funding terrorism in the region and throughout the world. Until regime change happens, there's absolutely nothing that is going to prevent these fanatics from trying to pursue their horrible ends. And again, Trump has talked about additional strikes. Those are probably going to be forthcoming, especially since Fedor is starting to try to re-excavate there. Again, how do we go after the much deeper Mount X? The but again, we're back to the issue of the Iranian people are wonderful people. They are freedom-loving people. They're an oppressed people. Unless they rise up, we're still going to have this bad actor, and all we can do is delay, delay, delay.
Scott, thank you once again. For our next story, we move to internal US affairs, where in a dramatic escalation of his ongoing feud with the US Central Bank, President Donald Trump has called for Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to resign immediately, posting on his Truth Social platform. Trump accused Powell of acting too late on interest rates and linked to a news article questioning Powell's recent testimony on costly renovations at the FED's headquarters. Powell, who was originally appointed by Trump during his first term, has faced repeated criticism from the president for not cutting interest rates fast enough to stimulate economic growth. The FED chair pushed back earlier this week, saying rate cuts would have come sooner if not for the economic fallout from Trump's aggressive tariff policies. While Trump is demanding Powell step down, legal precedent makes it nearly impossible for a president to remove a Federal Reserve chair without cause. Meanwhile, calls for an investigation into Powell's conduct are growing, with Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte urging Congress to probe what he called deceptive testimony. The Federal Reserve has declined to comment on the president's latest remarks. Scott, this isn't the first time Donald Trump has called for an independent body to resign. Does Trump's call for Powell to resign actually undermine the FED's independence, or is it just political theatre with no real impact here?
Political theatre, and again, as you rightly said, it is impossible unless there's malfeasance or criminal activity to remove a chair of the Federal Reserve. Senator Rand Paul and a number of other conservatives, especially in our U.S. Senate, have called for a full audit of the Federal Reserve System for several years. I think that would be a good first step to kind of set a shot across the bow of Powell. Many people really are not that big fans of the Federal Reserve. I mean, it took an actual active Congress and all that back in 1914 to create the Federal Reserve, and it's been really not been that helpful over the years. Unless the Federal Reserve does better at helping with the cycles, it really is a bad player. And it's Trump, it's political theater. Again, unless there's illegality, there's no way he's going to be able to remove Powell. And so it's back to will Powell. I mean, right now the latest employment figures actually fell far short of expectations for the month of June, and so stimulus is required, and yet Powell is keeping a tight rein because prices are coming down in America, but so is employment right now.
Thank you very much, Scott. We move on to our next news update from the United States. A new lawsuit has been filed against the Trump administration, accusing it of unfairly targeting minorities during immigration raids in Southern California. Filed by 3 individuals and several immigrant advocacy groups, the case claims federal agents carried out unlawful arrests, often without warrants, at bus stops, farms, street corners, and workplaces. Some of those detained were US citizens and people with valid documents. The lawsuit also alleges that detainees were denied access to lawyers, forced to sleep on floors, and in some cases had to drink from the toilets while held in poor conditions, according to the reports. It also argues the raids followed a systemic pattern of racial profiling, focusing on people based on how they looked or where they were. Advocates are now asking the court to halt these operations across 7 California counties. Federal officials say the raids were legal and that basic needs and legal rights were respected, but tensions continue to rise, especially in Los Angeles, a sanctuary city where protests against immigration enforcement has already led to dozens of arrests. Scott, do these lawsuits have the potential to reshape how immigration raids are conducted nationwide, or is it likely to stall out in the courts? And what are your thoughts on how these immigration raids have been conducted? We've just read out some of those claims there. Are there any weight to them?
Quote-unquote American citizens, what they're looking at are people who have entered this country and even naturalized using fraudulent documents or fraudulent rationales. So if somebody says, I came in and here's my documents and they're fraudulent, and again, under the Biden 4 years, they basically rubber stamped everything. Some of these things need to be reversed. Now, in terms of targeting, well, most of the immigrants, even though there's 99 countries worth of illegals that have come in over the last 4 years, a large majority of them are from Africa and South America. Guess what? Those are darker skinned people. You have China, you have a whole 30,000 plus Chinese men who came in under Biden. But again, those are not white Caucasians. So the question becomes, they play the race card all the time. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling of last week, these cases in Southern California may be able to hold up actions there until the appeals court plays out, but they can no longer become a nationwide injunction. And so that's going to allow the deportation activities to occur every place else except possibly these handful of counties. But again, immigration advocates had to look the other way when literally thousands and thousands and thousands of criminals and cartel members entered this country. And now all of a sudden, these people entered the country without due process. Why should they now get due process to get rid of them?
Scott, critics would say that these people do have fundamental human rights, those which some people have been claimed being violated. We've also seen the Trump administration make some serious errors in the past. You've obviously had the case of Kilmar Albrado Garcia, who isn't said to be the only person who has been deported mistakenly, even being a legal immigrant to the United States. What are your thoughts on some of the issues that have come up during these immigration raids, the actual legal issues, and also the Trump administration's response to them?
You're trying to remove up to 20 million illegals in this country. Again, probably about a good quarter or more are actual criminals, and you're trying to do it quickly. There may be mistakes. That's where the system allows for people to say, okay, this person's, we did a sweep. Sometimes when ICE comes in, the Immigration Enforcement Unit comes in and they arrest a person in a vehicle who's the actual cartel member, MS-13 member, but there's 3 other people in the vehicle. Are they acting in consort with that person, or are they just being given a ride? So there's a lot. So at times you're going to have these mass arrests of the individual plus whoever is with them, and maybe one of those people is not really eligible for deportation. So this is again where you want to have proper oversight within the executive branch, not by the courts that just want to stop everything, and not by these advocacy groups that want to stop everything. So we need to, so yes, when you're looking at 20 million plus that came into this country willy-nilly over the last 4 years, and we're trying to get rid of the worst of the worst, and then others as fast as possible. Is it going to be 100% accurate? Probably not. So the key is how do you catch it early? How do you correct it early? But you still keep your eye on the prize, which is getting all the bad people who are
Scott,
normal criminal activities out of this country.
Yes, thank you. We move on to our next news updates, where U.S. Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender has announced that several trade agreements are expected to be unveiled as early as next week. This development comes amid the Trump administration's ongoing efforts to secure favorable trade terms that support American industries and workers. The administration has engaged in extensive negotiations with various international partners, aiming to finalize deals before impending tariff deadlines. These trade agreements are anticipated to cover multiple sectors and are part of a broader strategy to reduce trade imbalances. While specific details of the forthcoming agreements have not been disclosed, officials suggest that the deals will prioritize benefits for domestic industries and reduce dependency on imports. Market analysts are closely watching these developments as the announcements could influence economic growth and investor confidence. The expected trade agreements mark a significant step forward in the administration's trade policy agenda, highlighting a continued focus on strengthening the United States' position in the global marketplace. We're once again joined by Scott Faulkner to discuss this in further detail. Scott, could rushing these trade deals before tariff deadlines backfire for both American businesses and consumers down the line? What are your thoughts?
They could. I mean, what you're dealing with here is Trump and his administration are literally trying to completely reinvent the world trade system and globally in one big jump. And it's a massive gamble that America has been on the short end of a lot of trade relationships over the last several decades. It's certainly hollowed out our manufacturing capacity in the United States as people seek cheaper venues to manufacture goods and bring them into the United States. Trump wants to change that. But again, we're talking, we're just started July of his first year. And to try to literally take something that has been operational for well over 50 years on a global scale and try to do something in months is a tall order. And again, has it all been gamed out by his economists? I would say that there's a lot of variables that probably still not really being thought through. The other piece of the puzzle is at the end of July, Congress leaves, most of Washington leaves because it's hot and humid, and Europe tends to take vacation. So unless these deals lock down before the end of July, we're going to be seeing mid-September before a lot of this stuff is going to play out.
Scott, July the 9th is obviously the deadline, and it's really creeping up on us with only the United Kingdom so far securing a trade deal. What is your response to critics that say this is a form of protectionism, this is a form of unilateral bullying? Do you think these labels are acceptable?
Bullying might be a strong term. Protectionism, it definitely is. Again, when you look at how did America grow in the 19th century, how did we fuel our industrial revolution to become the world's industrial power before World War I, it was a lot based on tariffs, that we protected our system and allowed our entrepreneurs to grow their industries. And Trump is in essence going back to the future to try to bring that back, because he knows that America's industrial might isn't what it used to be, in part because it's been hollowed out by trade deals in the past and people seeking cheaper labor elsewhere in the world. Again, it's a huge revolution, a huge fundamental rethinking of the global trading system, and it's a huge gamble.
Scott, thank you. My sincerest apologies. Also, I just gave you a bit of false information. Vietnam has also agreed to a trade deal with the United States yesterday. Apologies for that. But we move over to the Middle East for our next story, where according to local media reports, all eyes are now on Hamas as pressure mounts for the group to respond to a major ceasefire and hostage release deal. Israel has already agreed to the proposal brokered by Qatar and based on a framework shaped by US President Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff. Under the deal, Hamas would release 10 Israeli hostages, 8 immediately and 2 after 50 days, and return of the bodies of 18 others. In exchange, a 60-day ceasefire would begin, with negotiations for a long-term end to the war taking place during that window. According to local and international reports, this is the first time there is real hope Hamas will say yes. Qatar is applying intense pressure, pushing Hamas to accept the deal and move forward diplomacy. Israel's foreign minister says the government is serious about peace. The world now waits for Hamas's answer, a decision that could shift the course of the war. We now move to a related development where former Hamas hostage Eden Alexander is set to meet US President Donald Trump in Washington on Thursday, nearly 2 months after his release from captivity in Gaza. The 21-year-old dual US-Israeli citizen was freed on May the 12th after spending 584 days in Hamas custody, kidnapped during the October the 7th attack on his IDF base. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that both the President and First Lady Melania Trump will welcome Alexander and his family in the Oval Office. The meeting comes just days before Trump's planned talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where he's expected to push for an end to the Gaza war. Unlike other hostage releases, Alexander's freedom was not part of a ceasefire or prisoner swap. Hamas called it a goodwill gesture to Trump in hopes of a broader deal. Alexander, who grew up in New Jersey, returned to the US last month and has been recovering with his family since. We're once again joined by Scott Faulkner to discuss these developments in further detail. Scott, let's start with the most pressing issue, the possibility of an agreed ceasefire by Hamas. We have seen a ceasefire before, it didn't hold. We know that Hamas wants a permanent end to the war. This deal, however, is a 60-day pause in fighting. If Hamas does accept this deal right now, does it really open the door to lasting peace or just pause the fighting?
Reports that I'm picking up through my Middle East contacts that there is a bigger deal in the works, and that is where a consortium of Arab countries will actually take over running the Gaza Strip, and Hamas will be removed as a political entity in that part of basically the province or district of Gaza. If that happens, then we could have a real lasting peace, because at that point you're then looking at rational people instead of the fanatics of Hamas, looking after the well-being of their people, of the people in the Gaza Strip, and possibly looking at how do you economically develop the area in a meaningful way, as opposed to diverting aid dollars to basically train fighters and dig tunnels. So that is lurking behind the scenes, and I think part of Qatar and some of the other Arab states are trying to put tremendous pressure on Hamas to say, okay, let's do the ceasefire as an interim move. Let's get these hostages, because Israel's under a lot of domestic pressure to finally get all the hostages home. But let's look at a lasting solution, and a lasting solution is basically removing Hamas from the scene.
Yes, and Scott, we know that Donald Trump-Netanyahu meeting is coming up later this week. Donald Trump is expected to exert pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister. Of course, critics claim that Benjamin Netanyahu does not want an end to this war. We know that he is in a coalition government with this far-right party who have threatened to leave if the war ends. We've also seen Donald Trump call for the end of Netanyahu's corruption trial. Do you think Donald Trump has the power to exert enough pressure on Netanyahu for Israel to end this war now, which is entering its 21st month? What are your thoughts?
I think, again, pressure is, again, probably a strong term. I think the key is that on one front, continuing to arm Israel to bring additional anti-missile technology to the region so that the civilian if Iran or the Houthis or anyone else start to launch additional missiles, that they're being interdicted. But the other piece of the puzzle is, if my sources are correct, that that there's this bigger concept in the works, that may be the better leverage with the government, is to say, let's do this interim step, let's bring in this bigger solution, and an interim step will pave the way for this much bigger solution. So I think, is that pressure? Yes, on one front, but I think part of it is looking at the next chess moves and keeping the Israeli government apprised that there really is a solution to this. There really is a way out, and it's going to be a much broader set of players than just the U.S. and Israel.
That was Scott Faulkner, head of Eagle Enterprises. Thank you very much, Scott, for joining us on the program. We now move on to our next story, where China's top diplomat Wang Yi has warned the European Union against pursuing confrontation following sharp criticism from the Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, during their high-level meeting in Brussels. Wang told Kallas that despite disagreements, China and the EU should not view each other as adversaries. He insisted that Europe's security challenges have nothing to do with China, adding that Beijing is not and will not be a source of instability. But Kallas pushed back. In blunt remarks before the talk, she accused China of enabling Russia's war in Ukraine by propping up Moscow's economy. She also cited cyber attacks, election interference and unfair trade practices as threats to European security and prosperity. She said, quote, "Enabling war in Europe while seeking closer ties with Europe is a contradiction Beijing must address." Beijing, while calling itself neutral in the Ukraine conflict, continues to offer diplomatic and economic support to Moscow, raising alarms in Western capitals. Wang attempted to distance China from Washington's growing trade and tariff disputes with the EU, saying China is not the United States. The talks come ahead of a key EU-China summit in Beijing later this month. Kallas reiterated calls for more balanced trade ties and warned against China's export restrictions on critical minerals like rare earths. The two sides also discussed the Israel-Iran conflict, the Iran nuclear deal, tensions over Taiwan and human rights concerns in China. Wang will continue his European tour with stops in Germany and France in the coming days, as both sides attempt to stabilise a tense but vital relationship. We are joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political risk analyst located in Taipei, Taiwan, to discuss this in further detail. Ross, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Does China's warning to the EU really signal a desire for better ties, or is Beijing just trying to deflect blame for its support in Russia? We know that Beijing is a staunch supporter of Moscow. We saw the images coming out of the Red Square on VE Day. President of China and the President of Russia sat next to each other smiling. Does this signal a desire for better ties with Europe, Ross?
Well, the trajectory of China's relationship with Europe is certainly in flux at the moment. There was a period within the last 5 years where Europe, and the European Union specifically, were voicing a lot of criticisms of China over a range of issues that includes trade as well as human rights, China's policies in Hong Kong, and even China's policies towards Taiwan. But with the trade friction with the United States, we now see that the European countries are not as critical of Europe. They're not as critical of China anymore, and they're talking about improving the trade relationship with China.
Yes, and Ross, what are your thoughts about Europe's support? Europe's support for Beijing, given Beijing's support for Moscow. Do you think there can be any real development there when when Europe's enemy number one is Russia, along with one of China's closest allies?
That's a really interesting question, and perhaps the European countries are hoping for a way out of that conundrum, which would be for President Trump to somehow bring about a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. If a ceasefire were to happen, especially if it was an extended one, the challenge you just described for European countries would kind of disappear, because China would no longer be supporting a Russia that's at war with Ukraine. There would be a ceasefire. So I would say that situation is definitely something that the Europeans are waiting to see what happens. But at the same time, again, they're still interested in pursuing more trade with China, notwithstanding China's support for Russia over the past 3+ years.
Ross, thank you. You are staying with us. We move on to our next development. US President Donald Trump has announced a significant new trade deal with Vietnam, marking a major shift in economic ties between the two countries. Under the agreement, products imported from Vietnam into the United States will now face a 20% tariff. In exchange, American goods entering Vietnam will be exempt from tariffs entirely, the zero-duty rate that the White House says will level the playing field. Trump also announced a 40% tariff on transshipped goods. That's down from the 46% rate initially proposed in April. The deal comes after direct talks between Trump and Tu Lam, the General Secretary of Vietnam's Communist Party, and follows months of tensions over Vietnam's rising trade surplus with the United States. Trump called the agreement a fair and balanced deal that will benefit American manufacturers and farmers. No immediate response has been issued from Hanoi, but analysts say the move could signal a new phase in US-Asia trade policy. We're once again joined by Ross in this discussion. Ross, Vietnam previously held one of the highest, if not the highest, tariff of goods going into the United States at 46%. Vietnam now faces a 20% tariff. Along with the goods going the other way, 0%, completely exempt from tariffs. Given the hindsight, do you think this tariff policy has been a success for Donald Trump?
Certainly looks to be a success with regard to Vietnam. Vietnam's manufacturing sector has grown tremendously in recent years, in part because manufacturers have moved their manufacturing from China to Vietnam, along with other countries in Southeast Asia as well as India, but now they're going to, and a lot of these are cheap goods, inexpensive textiles, for example, but now they're going to come into the U.S. at a 20% tariff. So President Trump could certainly declare a victory in that the United States government will make a lot of tariff revenue from products made in Vietnam, and then at the same time, U.S. products could get into Vietnam at zero tariff. Vietnam's a growing market, a growing middle class, a growing well-to-do class as well. So there's certainly a lot of opportunity for American companies to make money in Vietnam by sending products made in America to Vietnam. So I think, to be fair to President Trump, this particular agreement does seem like a win. You could call it a win-win, but it certainly is a win for the United States.
You could have a look at the downsides also, though, Ross. Do you think this deal actually pushes forward Hanoi-Washington relations, or possibly risk pushing Vietnam closer to China?
That remains to be seen. There's a lot of hope among commentators, analysts, scholars in the United States to bring Vietnam much more closer to the United States over time, especially with regard to security issues or the sovereignty disputes in the South China Sea. But Vietnam, every time they give hope to these people in America who think that Vietnam is going to take the United States side in disputes with China, Vietnam takes some actions to show that they still maintain a very close relationship with China. And then at the same time, Vietnam has always maintained a close relationship with Russia as well, going back to the former Soviet Union days. The Vietnamese perspective, or their basis for their policies or their relations with the big powers is probably to try to, at this time, to be everybody's friend. But they're certainly not going to take the United States side, not from a security perspective as well. They're definitely seeking some balance in their relations with the United States and China.
Ross, thank you. You are staying with us once again. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung says his administration is doing its utmost to secure a trade deal with the United States before a crucial deadline set by President Donald Trump. Speaking at a press conference marking his first month in office, Lee admitted the talks were difficult and said he could not confidently predict an agreement by the July deadline. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
최대 현안 중 하나인 한미 통상 협상 또한 국익 중심의 실용 외교의 원칙을 바탕으로 호혜적이고 상생 가능한 결과 도출에 최선을 다하고 있습니다.
The president said both sides have not yet clearly defined what they want from the deal, but stressed that Seoul's goal remains a genuinely mutually beneficial outcome. He added his government is working hard to avoid new country-specific levies that could impact key export sectors. South Korea is already facing sector levies on steel and cars and is now focused on a 25% tariff that has been temporarily suspended until the next week. Without a deal, that tariff will come into effect just after midnight in Washington on July the 9th. Seoul's Ministry of Industry and Trade has confirmed it is seeking an extension. Ross, how badly does South Korea, Seoul, need this deal? If this trade deal doesn't come through by the deadline, how much could it damage South Korea's economic and also political standing?
South Korea definitely very much wants a deal. They don't want the Liberation Day tariff rate applied to South Korea, made in South Korean goods that are shipped to the United States. It's a very important export market for Korean companies. Now, to be fair to President Lee, he's only been in office a month, and the preceding period really was consumed with South Korea internal politics and the aftermath of the impeachment and then the removal of former President Yoon. So to be fair to the new president, he's only been in office a month with a new team, and they've had to get up to speed on where the negotiations stand because the negotiations began before he took office. So he does deserve some of our sympathy. He's been thrust into a very difficult situation, but now he's had a month to understand where the two sides are, and it's probably up to him to make some concessions to the United States. He's going to have to make some concessions on market access for U.S. products to South Korea, which has been a long-running concern of U.S. trade negotiators across several presidential administrations. Then the other side of that, as you mentioned, there's the political relationship, or more specifically, the security relationship. South Korea's new President Lee has to worry about the time, and the time will come when President Trump says South Korea needs to pay more of the costs for the U.S. troops, the nearly 30,000 U.S. troops that are in South Korea and helping to defend South Korea from North Korea.
Ross Feingold, political risk analyst, thank you very much. Always a pleasure having you on the program and for your insight. We now move on. North Korea is preparing to send up to 30,000 additional troops to support Russia in its war against Ukraine. That's according to local media reports. The soldiers are expected to arrive in phases by November, joining Russian forces during large-scale offensives. This would be a major increase. North Korea had already sent around 11,000 troops last year, a move President Vladimir Putin confirmed only recently. At the same time, U.S. military aid to Ukraine is facing delays, with Washington reportedly pausing shipments of air defense missiles. Kyiv says it hasn't received an official notice, but the timing adds pressure as Russia intensifies its push in eastern Ukraine. Russia is making ground near Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, key towns for Ukraine's supply routes. Ukraine's top commander says over 111,000 Russian troops are now concentrated in that zone. Meanwhile, reports suggest Russian generals may be training North Korean troops and that over 6,000 personnel will also be sent for mine clearing and rebuilding work inside Russia. The move signals deeper military ties between Pyongyang and Moscow and growing challenges for Ukraine on the battlefield. We're now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar, who's a journalist from the Korea Herald. He's located in Seoul. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for joining us on the program. What are your thoughts in this recent development? Reports that are coming from the area that nearly 30,000 North Korean troops are being sent to the front line in Ukraine. Does North Korea sending thousands of troops to Ukraine risk turning this war into a wider regional conflict? And how should allies respond to this development?
News as a surprise, but yeah, we have to be concerned with the numbers that has been coming out. In case of numbers, it is surprising, although we have to double check, because earlier also there were reports from the Ukrainian side that huge numbers are entering, and this is not a surprise. Russia and North Korea has undergone a defense treaty, we should not forget, in November last year. So this should not be taken as surprise, and not only on the military side, but if we see the political cooperation between Russia and North Korea in the last couple of months, it is growing, and it is growing, cutting across politics, culture, and even military ties, not only on ground, but behind the ground as well. You can see there are training exchanges. If you can see, just last 2-3 days before, the Kim Il-sung Military University president was there, like Kim Gum-chol, and he was also there, and things are moving in a very, we can say, multi-dimensional direction. But we should not be surprised about that. But yes, what is more concerning is that, unlike the traditional warfare setups where center of gravity was the focus, in this war we can see that, urban warfare, new generation warfare techniques are being used, technology is being used, cyber security is being used, and through conventional methods, the involvement of troops, including from the third country, and North Korea has been seen in that way. But we should not be taken. We should not take it as surprise, because this is not a new thing. But yes, numbers, we have to be very careful, because every time numbers come, and it is being differentiated by different sources. For example, recently there was a news in South Korea also, popularly, that 600 soldiers who died from North Korea had been paid tribute by Kim Jong-un. So that was also a news of surprise to many in Korea. Like 600 people died, and many more may die in future as well. So it is concerning. That means there is a huge involvement of troops, which is alarming from South Korean perspective. But in warfare it happens, and we should not take it as big surprise. And
Dr. Kumar, what is your view on Ukraine's current position in the war? If these reports turn out to be true, we know that Russia is getting 30,000 new North Korean troops on the front line. We've also had news of US military aid to Ukraine facing serious delays, some say Washington halting it. What is your thoughts on Ukraine's current position?
For Ukraine, it would be a big setback, because when you have to motivate the soldiers on the battleground, when you are fighting with a very big power like Russia, you need more support, and that support has been seen from the European side. But one thing which was missing is that, in the form of human power, like human troops, had not been in huge numbers being sent from the European countries who are in support of Ukraine. And US military involvement is also unlikely in current circumstances. South Korea, although from in this part of the world, South Korea has confirmed before that they are not going to support with the lethal weapon. So situation is little challenging, not little, but very challenging, because on warfare, if you are going through, as I told you, disinformation and other things can be managed somehow and can be tackled somehow. But when it comes to like troops in presence, the Western allies and Eastern allies like even Korea, like South Korea, are reluctant to send this kind of troop support. So it is a very challenging and I would say a very embarrassing situation right now turning out. So I think only the ceasefire talks and the President Trump's involvement can prove very helpful in this way, in this situation.
Much for your insight and joining us on the program. We now move on to our next story, where US President Donald Trump is lashing out at Republicans for delays in passing his sweeping tax and spending bill, calling it the big, beautiful bill and warning that MAGA is not happy. Trump took to social media to criticize GOP lawmakers for moving too slowly, saying the bill promises the largest tax cuts in American history, while Democrats are pushing for what he calls the biggest tax increase in history. We have some live visuals there coming out of the House, the US Capitol there. House Speaker Mike Johnson has urged unity, saying we can't make everyone 100% happy, but insisted this is the best bill the GOP could ever deliver. Let's listen in to the US House Speaker.
We are working through everybody's issues and making sure that we can secure this vote. I feel very positive about the progress. We've had lots of great conversations. I've met with individuals and groups all day long, as has the president, who's fully engaged as well, trying to convince everybody this is the very best product that we can produce. But I feel good about where we are and where we're headed, and stay tuned. There's more conversations to be held. Body. It's a legislative process. By definition, all of us have to give up on our personal preferences. I never got to ask anybody to compromise core principles, but preferences must be yielded for the greater good, and that's what I think people are recognizing and coming to grips with. And this is part of the process. It's a consensus building operation, has been from day one. This is the culmination of 14 months worth of work, and I believe we're going to deliver this, get the ball over the goal line. So stay.
We are joined by live visuals here. We have some more information for you on agreeing to the resolution as amended. We see there 207 Republicans have voted yes so far, with 5 voting no, standing against the president's ambitions in passing this big, beautiful bill. And as we see, we have 8 there who are not, who are so far not voted or objected. The big, beautiful bill is being passed. It permanently extends 2017 tax cuts expiring at the end of the year if not renewed. We have over 100 objections filed to block cuts from Democrats to Medicaid and food stamps. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has slammed the bill as a deal with the devil, warning it would strip health care from 17 million Americans. Let's take a listen in to the Democrat while we keep this live and keep you updated on the situation in the U.S. Capitol.
President Trump had issued some statements throughout this process saying and urging, insisting that this bill does not cut Medicaid. He's also said some things, he says he doesn't think I'm too much of a smart person. And I'll tell you one thing. It doesn't take a smart person to know if you're being lied to. President Trump, you're either being lied to or you are lying to the American people. This bill is a deal with the devil. It explodes our national debt. It militarizes our entire economy, and it strips away health care and basic dignity of the American people for what? To give Elon Musk a tax break and billionaires the greedy taking of our nation. We cannot stand for it, and we will not support it. You should be ashamed.
Good. And that's what.
As you see there, we have the reaction from AOC, but we are giving you the live visuals of the House beginning a key procedural vote to adopt rules allowing the final debate and passage of the Senate amended bill. The vote has now dragged on for over 7 hours. As of July the 3rd, it's still open, with leadership keeping the doors open to persuade skeptical Republicans, and there are them, as we can see by these numbers, keeping the doors open for the longest House vote in history. We will bring you all the updates in regards to the passing of Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill, or the blocking alternatively. Well, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you all news updates from around the world. Thank you.
ITV नेटवर्क के